at Catholic Relief Services. Avinash Persaud, Special Advisor on Climate Change at IADB. Shakuntala Thilsted, Director of Nutrition, Health, and Food Security at CGIAR. And Foreign Policy's Allison Carlson for discussion on climate-resilient agriculture.
Great. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thrilled to build on the last conversation and series of conversations with focusing on climate-resilient agriculture. You know, we've been talking about some of the gains in agriculture that have occurred over the last half century, which have really been remarkable if we think about that progress. But the fact of the matter is climate change is steadily eroding so many of those gains. And as we've talked about, it's contributing to malnutrition, destabilizing agricultural economies, contributing to migration, you know, all of these cascading factors. And so under these pressures and environmental stressors, we do really need to understand what interventions are really going to have an impact and enable more climate resilient approaches to agriculture. And so I'd like to dive deeper into that about the how, like how can we do this and why it's important. Carla, I'd like to turn to you first, and with your work with Catholic Relief Services, can you draw a little bit on your experience and how you're seeing this manifest in the communities that you're working with, and also some of the interventions, some of the programs, some of the ways in which you're working with farmers to be able to better respond to and adapt to these changing environments?
Thank you, Allison. I think we can all agree that climate change is our new normal. Like weather patterns have changed, and especially rain patterns have changed, like becoming more volatile and more irregular. And this is really affecting smallholder farmers. Just let me give you an example. In the dry corridor in Central America, this is an area that covers Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Honduras. That area is, the majority of the population are smallholder farmers. The majority of the food, like half of the food produced in that area, half of the food produced comes from that area, and 80% of the corn and beans are produced in this area. And if you know Central America, corn and beans are very central staples, not only for their diet, but also for their culture. So since 2010, this area has been having recurring droughts. The temperature has increased, and the rainfall is completely erratic. What is very specific is the change of the nature of the canicula. So the canicula is this dry spell that happens in the middle of the the rainy season, that generally lasted like 1 or 2 weeks. But we are seeing now that the canicula is going longer. In 2018, the canicula lasts for 40 days. That is like almost 6 weeks. And that destroys all the crops for these smallholder farmers. Like 2.2 million people lost their harvest, and 1.6 million people went into food insecurity. We also know that 80% of the land in this area is degraded land. And it's degraded not only because of climate change, but also because of traditional agricultural practices, like plowing, burning crops, like the deforestation of hillsides. So this combination between climate change and more severe extreme weather patterns and land degradation is really throwing this population into a cycle of poverty, food insecurity, and forced migration. If you are a farmer and you cannot bring food to your table, then you have to look for opportunities somewhere else. You have to sell your assets. You have to take your kids out of school. And these traditional practices, what they do is that they make the land very compacted. So when rain comes, nothing can go. It's like the rain just runs off, as opposed to like a healthy soil where it acts more like a sponge. So when it rains, the water comes and it's absorbed, and the moisture is kept so that in a dry period, the crops can be more successful. And I think what is important to see is that the difference between having a dry soil and a healthy soil is the difference for farmers to be able to bring food to their tables or to go into hunger. And if we have these more, extreme weather events, the need to have more resilient food systems, it becomes very urgent. In CRS, we work on something that we call water smart agriculture, that are basically regenerative agriculture practices with water management practices. So we call it WSA. And we've been working there with 3,000 farmers on demonstration plots, side to side with traditional agricultural approaches. And the difference that we find are really, really encouraging, like 37% increase in beans production, 41% increase in corn production, as in relation to what traditional agricultural practices give you for the same periods. Farmers are telling us that even when they are in dry seasons, using water smart agricultural practices are giving them better yields for their products.
Thank you for that, and I think you make a really important connection between soil and water management and the impacts that can have in the near term as well, and how vital that is and those systems of management are. Shakuntala, I'd like to turn to you, and building off your colleagues' previous comments with your work at CGIAR, how are you seeing these climate impacts manifest, but also, very importantly, and to build off of Carla's point, what are some of the ways in which you're working within your platform to support farmers to adapt practices to really focus on and enable greater productivity and resilience under these kind of environmental strains?
Thank you so much for having me here. I come from the CGIAR, which is the world's largest agricultural research partnership and collaboration, a network of 15 CGIAR centers that covers many areas in agricultural production and focusing a lot on producing foods to improve food and nutrition security. We have a new strategy that started about 2 years ago and goes up to 2030 with the Sustainable Development Goals. And the mission is transforming food, land, and water systems in the climate crisis. So we do think we have this opportunity to be able to address many of the issues that we have and also take into consideration the climate changes that we are seeing. The pathways that we have chosen are transformative, and it's through policy interventions, innovation development with partners in countries. We work only in the global south, and capacity sharing, which is extremely important. Being a research organization, we have close partnerships with national and regional research centers. But importantly, we focus on delivering people-centric, nutrition-sensitive food systems approaches that are context-specific, culturally acceptable, and adaptable for scale in the regions in which we work. So we try to be global, but much focus on where we are working and the communities with which we serve. Let me give one example. I can give many, but I've chosen this one from southern Madagascar, which faced serious drought from 2019 to 2022. And the people, hundreds of thousands of people that live in this area were suffering from food insecurity and famine. Many had lost their livelihoods. Working with one of the centers, the International Potato Center, new variety, but not just one, but a few varieties of orange sweet potatoes were introduced in this area. And these were bred to have long roots and a short maturity period, which meant that they grew quicker and could be harvested faster, and therefore meet the needs for food in these communities. Not just the roots were used, but as many parts of Africa and very much in Asia, sweet potato leaves are used as a very nutrient-rich vegetable, producing new nutrients, micronutrients to families, but also they were sold to others. Importantly, a group was established of local, some young people, but local people from the area that were trained in producing the vines and in this dissemination. So in a very short time, these vines reach to many, many thousands of families. And therefore, this was a very good way of alleviating the food and nutrition security that was caused by the drought.
You both provided very important examples of what's being done to help adapt, and critically important to be able to span. And I want to get to the scale in a moment. But first, Avinash, I'd like to turn to you. In a previous conversation, we were talking about the importance of food systems strengthening, as well as providing safety nets to be able to respond to shocks to the system when there isn't the opportunity or time to be able to adapt. And so understanding that those protections and those safety nets are vital, I'm curious how you're thinking about that and the safety nets or tools that are necessary. Typically, in our conversation before, you mentioned insurance being, a standard approach or historical approach to being able to provide those kinds of protections. But also, in the face of climate change, these situations are becoming, or the shocks are becoming, more frequent, unpredictable, and also uninsurable. And so in the case of those uninsurable instances, what do you do?
So there are a couple challenges. The first, and I think Carla set this out very well earlier, development is contextual. So let's think about what we're dealing with, especially in the Central America area, which is particularly prone now to droughts, serious droughts. Between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, the costs of climate change are 5 times greater than anywhere else. So in this area, droughts is a problem. And many of the farmers are smallholders. Mm-hmm. They're women. The majority of women-owned small farms, and they're isolated. They are often a long way away from market without good communication. And in the old days, 20, 30 years ago, there used to be a belief that there was a network of centers to provide support to the farmers. And that somewhere along the line, and perhaps ideologically, the view was that the market can do this. Basically, we've seen a real withdrawal of these centers that used to service the farmers, provide seeds, provide insurance, provide credit. So the first thing we have to do is put these centers back and to reach people who are in small-scale, isolated farms. And that requires the state to spend money. And we're talking about countries that are highly climate vulnerable, and so they're now heavily indebted because their principal way of dealing with the climate problem has been more debt. So you're asking a heavily indebted country to spend more money to put back a network that wasn't there before. And the scale of what we're talking about is big. We're not going to solve the problem of climate change, and we're not going to create growth drivers through charity. We're not going to do it through a handout. We have to, we're talking about a scale. The developing world needs about $400 billion per year on resilience. Total aid around the world on everything is half of that, 200 billion. So we need systemic solutions. And the final thing I'd say, so we're looking at cash transfers to farmers, but that needs a network of systems, and cash transfers that may be adaptive. Extreme heat days, we may send more cash through the transfer. And the final thing I want to pick up on is what you said on insurance, because traditionally in farming, we think of microinsurance and microcredit as being very useful solutions, and there are disasters happening, and we think disasters insurance. Well, climate change is an uninsurable event, though. Now, insurable events are events where there's a big problem happens infrequently. So let's say once every 10 years. In which case, I've got 10 years to pay small premiums that when the 10th year happens, I've got the cash to pay out. Now what we're seeing is that the losses are increasing, the frequency of the loss is increasing, and the correlation of that loss is increasing with other losses. So we cannot diversify the risk, spread the risk. And so the state, again, has to build resilience and provide support. There are no cheap magical solutions like some insurance or some microcredit. The solutions are difficult and expensive.
And you raise also a very important point about many of these countries that are so vulnerable are indebted and are very much struggling and have very limited fiscal space to invest. And so when we're thinking about the kinds of investments that are needed that will be high impact and as efficient as possible and streamlined, I'd love to hear from all of you how you're thinking about that. And first going to Carla and Shakuntala, where you work, what are the kinds of investments that are needed, but also what are you seeing that is having a high level of impact?
Yeah, thank you. I think the work that we're doing on water smart agriculture is showing us that this is a viable option for small farmers. It helps farmers to work on water retention, become less reliant on chemical fertilizers, and be more resilient to climate shocks. But also, it's a low-cost approach. So farmers do not really need to buy very expensive equipment or put together complex water irrigation systems. They really need to follow some principles that have been there for a while now, but that have been proven to be very effective for the context that we are facing right now. And in terms of what Avinash was saying to me was interesting, because I think we have seen very interesting successes at the individual level, at the plot level. But we know that the real challenge lays in how do we scale this up in a way that we can cover entire regions. And for that, we need to work differently. We need to work at the local level, at the regional level, national levels. We need to involve all the actors in the ecosystems, the government, private sector, local organizations, research institutions, because the complexities now are too many. One actor by itself cannot do it. I have a very nice example of this scaling up approach. In Central America, we're working on digital soil mapping. So we've been working in 4 countries, taking samples and mapping the different profiles of soil in the area. We've been doing this with different research institutions, universities, etc. The experience in El Salvador has been particularly interesting. There, the government has been providing, they've been spending around $35 million per year, putting together subsidy packages of seeds and fertilizers for farmers. But it was done in an approach that was more like one size fits all. So they were giving these fertilizers without making any difference on the different soil profiles of farmers. And what it was creating in some cases is like a reduction in yields, acidification of soil. So with the information that we have with the detailed soil mapping, they put together a pilot in 3 regions. And they did customized fertilizers using these soil mappings. And the results were really, really good. Like we saw increase of yields in 46 to 77%. And there were farmers that were reporting increasing in 400%. Like for coffee farmers, that was interesting too, because they were not only able to increase their yields, they were also able to improve the quality of their coffee, so that they were able to be in a higher bracket at the international markets and get better prices for their coffee. So I think it is important that these practices are bring to a scale and also included in national agricultural policies, because we need to make sure that they are part of like a higher approach and not just like the plot approach. If we want to scale broad and deep, we need to work with all these different actors and we need to work with a different mindset.
Thank you for not only articulating the principle, but providing a really powerful example of how that is being put into practice and the impact that it's having. Shakuntala, I'm wondering, from your perspective and your work, are there complementary examples or others that you can think of that represent those principles?
Yeah, but I'd like to talk about an approach that, so in the CGIAR, which started in the 60s, the focus has been on the crops. And there's very little about the people. And we heard both from Avinash and our speaker that it's important to take into consideration a people-centered approach. So that's what I lead nutrition, health and food security in the CGIAR, and that has been my mission, to ensure that we have a people-centric approach to the work we do in the CGIAR. And if we do that, if we bring the people at the forefront, then that would also inform the kinds of research we do, the innovations we do, and if we ensure that people are also at the center when we form policies together with the government, then there would be, these policies will be oriented, so they take in consideration what's happening at the community level. When we do research in the CGIAR, we look at the data and we look at how well we've done with the research. And again, this is what happens with crops, what perhaps happens on land, very little on water. But what we do not do, we do not go back to the people and get their evaluation of the innovations that we put on the ground. And if we would do that, then we would get we'd get very good information that can be integrated with the research data we have and then inform the policies, so that we really have people-centric approaches to the work we do in agriculture and food. Not easy, because we all grown up that we think about the quantities of food that we produce, and it stops with food. It doesn't even go beyond the production in the food systems. So, and again, if we bring in the people, then we would take into consideration other parts of the food systems. For example, the supply chains and consumption, and that would also give us other avenues for better solutions that we can put in place.
Absolutely. To build on that, Avinash, I'm curious about your perspective on how to have a people-centric approach at scale. And also, as part of that, what is absolutely necessary is to increase the revenue streams and investments contributed to that. And you had mentioned previously that this is an area where there's incredible opportunity for public-private partnerships, but they're relatively scarce in this space. And so when you're thinking about that and the need for greater investment in climate resilient innovations, how are you thinking about being able to do that at scale?
I've been very struck by listening to both of you about the sort of multi-dimensional levels of this problem: international, national, and local. If we want to scale up, we're talking at a national level, at a macro level. The risks are that governments will get overly influenced by certain interests, which will tend to favor larger players. It's easier and simpler. Macro solution, a few large players. So we need to ward against that. Yeah. And that's why we need to be informed by what's working at a pilot level, local level, micro level. Not all of those things are scalable, but we need to be informed by that to go to the national level. But let me leave you with a challenge that's happening at the international level where I think some of you can play a role. You know, if we want our small female farmers and these isolated communities to have better incomes, better prices for their products, they need better markets locally, but also internationally. And what we're seeing internationally is in the name of sustainability, we're seeing levels of reporting standards and supply chain standards that are very hard for small farmers in isolated places to do. So we need to think about how do we make sure that this is actually supporting sustainability and not pushing sustainability away. And I'm quite worried about that. We're not really thinking through those issues. So you know, we need these markets to do well, for these farmers to do well. And at the moment, if foreign investors are not investing because they're saying, well, I'm not at all clear where the export market is. Export markets are shrinking, and that's creating some food insecurity around the world. One of the final things we're doing, and we're open to some ideas and thinking, we're taking a group of countries in the region, in Central America and in the Caribbean, and doing the world's first ever multi-country debt swap. They're fairly small countries, and we're swapping them all into one type of bond with our credit rating, the Inter-American Development Bank. It's a AAA rated bank. And as a result, we get a much cheaper form of money. And we benefit from liquidity. And we want to say that because we're benefiting from being regional, part of the benefit of this process should be regional public goods, including regional food security. And we need some ideas on thinking around what does that mean to support this initiative.
Thank you for that. It's incredibly important and a new approach, an innovative approach to be able to reach this scale that's needed. And we only have a few minutes left, but would like to hear from both of you, Carla and Shakuntala, and then close out with you, Avinash, about what are those types of innovations that you're seeing and that you think we all need to understand more, lean into, so that we can reach this investment at scale. I appreciate you tying this to UNGA as well. We're here in this moment with an audience of policymakers, investors, practitioners, and so if you have, an ask of how these decision makers can get involved to really focus on and strengthen climate resilient agriculture, what would that be?
Yeah, thank you. It's been very encouraging and interesting to hear the different panels and to see the different initiatives that have been happening in different parts of the world. I think some of them are more scalable than others. Most of them are really trying to have change from the ground and put the farmers in the center of all these efforts, which is very important because if we're talking about traditional agriculture, for example, these are practices that have been happening for centuries. To change from those practices to new ways of dealing with the complexities in weather and the economies that we have, it takes really time. It's a process of behavior change. If we don't have the farmers at the center of these processes, things are not going to change. So I think another thing that is very important for us is the fact that we are seeing that a clear impact on water smart agricultures, regenerative agricultures. But we also see that the global climate finance, it's just a tiny percent that is coming to agriculture and particularly to small farmer holders. And we need to change this ratio. We need to really fill the gap in finance climate and make sure that initiatives such that include landscape restoration, water, and soil management are included in any initiative that happens in that area.
Well said. Shakuntala, and for you?
Very much what you build on. You've heard that we both are talking about people-centered approaches, keeping people at the center. And if you look at where we are now, the focus has been very much on if you take the last State of Food Security and Nutrition report about all the disruptions that we have had and still have, and what effect this is having in the number of people who are malnourished and go hungry. So, for me, if we really have a people-centered approach and first take care of the people, then we can take care of the agriculture and we can also take care of the climate, because the people are the stewards of our planet. If they don't have the possibility, if they are not well taken care of, if they go in hungry, then you can't get them to be the stewards of our planet and take care, which would also lead to the developments we want with respect to climate change. So for me, that's extremely important, that we start with the people, and that means starting with communities.
Great. And Avinash, for you?
So very briefly, we're here in New York Climate Week, and agriculture and climate, there are lots of challenges. Agriculture is a major greenhouse gas emitter. And to bring in the people-centered approach, which is so vital, a lot of the problems in many Latin countries is deforestation. Brazil is like 70 or 80% renewable energy, but it's the fifth biggest emitter in the world because of the forest fires and the deforestation. And that's partly because we need to give people in the communities alternative livelihoods. We can't just ban deforestation. We need to give a proper economic alternative. And the danger is that if you have a hammer, all you see are nails, and we're a development bank, so we're focused on development. We get the lowest cost loans, but they're loans. So bear that in mind. We've been looking around at some of the challenges, and we think that one of the problems is the transition, say, from emitting a cattle farm, say, to something more plant-based and more sustainable, is often that there's 5 years of no income. There's 5 years of investment. And so we're looking at coming up with transition finance to help farmers move to something more sustainable. And we could provide them a long-term, low-cost way of financing that transition.
Great. And you all referenced the need for more alignment, synergies, partnerships in that space too. And there's so much more that needs to be understood as part of this. Our economics or our FP Analytics division has done some research with the support of Catholic Relief Services to understand what is, the data, what is the evidence base, and it's a bit of a meta-analysis of research done by CRS, also others, and our analysts as well, to understand what are some of the risks, what are the impacts, but the interventions that are having impact but need more investment for scale. And so more research is needed, more partnerships are needed, and greater alignment to have the impact at scale that you've all said is so needed. So thank you for articulating that so well and for the work you're doing to make that happen. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.